Welcome back to the Cage Rage podcast. It is March the 8th, 2020. We are coming off a eventful weekend in the world of mixed martial arts. UFC 248 took place in Las Vegas, Nevada last night. Two big title fights. UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya defended his middleweight title in a lackluster, to say the least, middleweight title bout. And we saw an instant strawweight title classic. We're going to cover those. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about where we're going to go from here. Before we get there, Miguel Adorati, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Coming off a nice UFC, I guess. Like I said offline, hate it when Chad's right, but Adesanya and Romero did not deliver really the excitement people were hoping to see. I thought it was a compelling fight, but I'm in the minority here.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about this because here's some of the headlines. You got just a basic, just outlining what happened here from ESPN. Mark Ramundi, Israel Adesanya outpoints Yoel Romero to retain UFC title. Here you got from SB Nation, Adesanya is blaming Romero for the boring UFC 248 bout. It takes two to tango. Here's one from MMA Fighting. Dana White shocked over Yoel Romero's UFC 248 performance against Israel Adesanya, and he really let him have it at the press conference. And here's what is the perennial next contender for the middleweight crown. Paulo Costa is coming out just trashing Israel Adesanya, saying it was a crap fight and he's a shameful champion. And the last one I have here is that Israel Adesanya is saying that UFC 248 doesn't impact legacy, but I definitely lost respect for Yoel Romero. Just in basic summary, it was a very lackluster fight. This is one of those kind of fights where, I just call them kind of wash fights where styles make fights. They get in there. We have high expectations for the bout. But then we get in there and we realize that their styles just didn't go well with each other. They were both very, very timid of each other. Yoel didn't really push the pace. Israel was clearly very respectful of the power of Romero. Romero likes to kind of play this lull, try to beat you with quick burst type of style, conserve his energy. He's devastating with his power in many different areas. He's a great wrestler. And Adesanya just used a lot of footwork and wanted to just kind of outpoint him from the outside and get in and out. Here's my big takeaway from this. Yeah, I can see why people are frustrated with the champion. But at the same time, this was a big risk that he asked for against a name that everybody said he would never want to be in a cage with, would be a stylistic nightmare. And nevertheless, Israel Adesanya went in, fought 25 minutes against Yoel Romero, and in hindsight, keep in mind this man won Fight of the Year last year with Kelvin Gastelum, and then he knocked out the champion in front of 70,000 people in the second round. And last night he had maybe his most criticized performance by far to this point, but nevertheless, the history books are going to look back and they're going to see a W next to Yoel Romero's name when looking at Israel Adesanya's legacy. So was this that much of a is he saying this didn't impact his legacy? I would disagree. He still came away with a W over Yoel Romero, nonetheless. What do you think, Miguel?
Yeah, I think that's the point. I think he doesn't think it impacted his legacy negatively, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's up in the air. I don't know how to interpret the fight. I think Romero. I'm impressed with Romero, and I like Romero. And I like his style but the problem really, and it's becoming an insurmountable problem at this point at 43 years old or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, here you have a wrestler who doesn't wrestle. And that's why, I was joking around there in the beginning saying, he's a great wrestler. And everyone was like, is he? Because he doesn't show it. He doesn't do any wrestling. And here was a match where, there were several times where I thought he could have positioned himself to tie Adesanya up against the fence. And then, chest to chest, he should be able to work a takedown there. I don't know. Olympic quality wrestling sometimes is wrestling defense and it turns into wrestling defense in MMA. No one's going to take Romero down, I don't think, but he doesn't wrestle. So that was the X factor. That was the thing was we hadn't seen Adesanya on the ground facing off against a guy who would be on top and be applying pressure, I mean, for all intents and purposes, Anderson Silva overcame that, with Sonnen, obviously is the famous one. But, Anderson was very rude to good wrestlers like Dan Henderson and things like that. And I didn't see that in Adesanya. So, in terms of legacy, yeah, I think he has now set the bar lower for his own legacy a little bit.
Yeah, but do you see my point, though, that nevertheless, he still comes away with the W over Yoel Romero? He still gets to add him to his list of names that he's got wins over nonetheless. And Romero is, even with, kind of a checkered record over the past couple of years in big title fights. He lost to Costa. He lost the two Whitaker fights on record, even though they're both close. He lost this Adesanya fight that was very close. And the Costa fight was really close. Nonetheless, so I mean, he's going to be remembered as one of the best and definitely most scary middleweight contenders of this era. And Adesanya now has knocked out Whitaker and scored a W, however he had to do it, over Romero. So I mean, I think that and we know that when he fights Paulo Costa,
that's you just mentioned it. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you just mentioned it. What this loss or fight does for Adesanya is it means that you get Costa next and not a Jones super fight.
And I think Costa is going to get him back into where the fans are wanting to see, because there's not going to be any of this with Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa is going to be somebody that's going to come straight forward and is going to push a very strong pace. I actually think Izzy's got the right mindset right when it comes to Costa right now. I think a lot of it's going to be determined. You can look at Costa and everybody knows that there's some skepticism about whether he's a clean fighter. Let's just say it. We look at that man, and I mean, if he looks like the type that would get busted, but to this point, apparently he hasn't. But
he could almost pass for Chinese.
And we'll get there, but he gets through this one that I think was his toughest fight stylistically. I hoped for.
I don't think I take points away from Adesanya. I mean, some people might want to be critical of him or whatever. I don't think he loses points. I think that this was supposed to be a springboard that it didn't turn into because it was a flat performance. But yeah, netting the win at the end of the day, Romero is going to be the terror that he was, and he's going to have a win over him. The fight, the way it plays out, I think, you move on. You don't want to do Adesanya should never do the rematch. Don't do anything like that.
No.
Really, with Romero, I think Romero, this is the first time he's come up short. But not only that, it's despite all the fearsomeness, I was entertained. I liked the fight, but I feel like the George Foreman statement where he said that, fighting could be like jazz, where like the more sophisticated it gets, the less people like it. And I don't know. I mean, Yoel Romero came out kind of Genki Sudo style, you know what I mean? In a very unorthodox passive stance. He didn't turn his back like Sudo does or anything like that. But I think that that's exactly what it was he wanted to be pursued. He wanted to see what the other guy did. And he made I think he won the first 2 rounds. I don't know. He made it a more complicated fight. I don't see 49-46. I don't think Adesanya had any real highlights or any shining moments. Yeah, I think maybe, this is a fight won on chopping leg kicks.
Well, and that's and to that point, this was about the most frustrating fight in the world to try to score because there wasn't any really big moments. I mean, the big moments that are talked about so often that I'm reading in like comment boards and stuff and watching it live was like Yoel hitting him with some shots early in the fight, and it appeared that really move Izzy, but Israel Adesanya is somebody that just has really fast feet and was getting out of the range from taking further damage from Romero. That's what he was doing the whole fight. Really, the biggest damage that sticks out of my mind was him attacking that right leg of Romero with leg kicks, and I think that's probably the most damage that is sustained to this day. And that's another point that I want to bring up. We've seen other guys fight Romero a lot tougher. I mean, obviously, Paulo Costa just took the fight to him. A lot of people thought he lost that, and that was only a 3-rounder. If that would have been a 5-rounder, Yoel Romero would have won that fight. And then you have the 10 rounds between two fights with Robert Whittaker that were just both classics. And Whittaker really took the fight to him. But we've also seen and heard from people like Luke Rockhold and Robert Whittaker about how much a fight with Romero takes out of them. Keep in mind, Israel Adesanya has a bright future, is an investment for the UFC. This was a big risk to even take this fight when he didn't need to do it. Most managers would have definitely told him not to take this fight. And he comes away with the W, nonetheless, after going 25 minutes with him. And he can probably fight in 2 months. And he could probably fight in 2 months. He's still healthy. So, how is that not a win for Adesanya at this point? Especially considering where he's at, where he wants to go, his longevity, he's only getting better. I mean, the 2 takedown attempts that we've seen from Romero, he took Adesanya down, I believe in the third. Adesanya pops right back up. The second one was just a straight sprawl circle off the clinch and back into striking stance. He just shut the takedown down. So he's, at this point, we still have yet to see somebody that's able to take Adesanya down and hold him there. And is that because no one can? Or, I mean, is that because no one's really tried? Or is that because he's better with his defensive wrestling than what he's getting credit for? And with his footwork, he keeps a brilliant range. And people are also remembering that you have to remember.
See, but what's odd to me is he, like, I expected Romero, especially there was a point in the fight where he was actually starting to jump up and down. Like, he would jump up and then kind of go into a shot and stuff like that, like telegraphing this thing. But he was doing weird things. But I thought right around that period, I would have ducked under Adesanya's leg and tried to catch him throwing a high kick and take him down and commit to it like a real wrestler does. Like he knows how to do, because he didn't really commit. Like, that put your head to the guy's chest and try to bore through him until you've got the guy down. That type of wrestling is what I expected from Romero. That's what I expected Adesanya to force him to do. But he backed off every time. So,
and on that point,
on
that point, I don't know if you saw the little clip that I screenshotted from Anakin Florian's podcast, but Kenny Florian gave his prediction for this fight, and he predicted a late stoppage for Israel Adesanya, and he was saying that he thought that Adesanya taking this fight, that he's seen something, and he was like he was saying that he sees the same thing, that he thinks that Yoel plays that kind of, just kind of real, swaying style, waiting to, explode with big power, lulling style of just, taking, like as Izzy pointed out in his post-fight speech, he kind of takes 2 minutes off and then fights a minute, takes 2 minutes off, fights a minute. He says he thinks he does that and doesn't use his wrestling because he doesn't want to get tired. That he's such a big, strong guy who's had issues with cardio in the past, that he might gas with that sort of a heavy Chael Sonnen Khabib style game plan. That's why he doesn't use his wrestling, and that's an interesting thought. And it
may very well be right. Yeah, they may very well be right. Unfortunately, that's an ace in your back pocket that you're never going to use. Then and unfortunately, he's become a guy who's a non-wrestler at this point. You know what I mean? And like I said, they're just, if he wasn't going to use that, then I think that puts a whole different spin on the warm up to the fight. I think that part of his fear is that completeness that he brings, being able to get you to the ground and stuff, as well as the big right hand. The bottom line to me is the best shot he landed was the first one. That's a very bad sign for everybody, including him. If you're a judge, That's a long time ago to start you're remembering that. So that that's the problem, which worked the other way around in the Joanna fight, in that the best shot of the fight was actually the spinning back fist that she clipped Weili with in like the last 10 seconds of the fight. And that was clearly a shot that stunned the girl,
What's your thoughts on this, though, before we get to Weili, because there's a lot to talk about that, but what's your thoughts on, you said Romero's biggest shot was was at the beginning, and I agree. What do you think about Dana's outrage about Romero? Because he's more looking at it like this was your big opportunity that you didn't deserve. You weren't on some win streak. You snuck in here and you did not make the most of this opportunity. You did not go in there and fight the champion. But at the same time, I can kind of see that argument, but at the same time, I kind of understand that this was a chess match. This was a both these guys are so good at what they do. And I think I genuinely believe we're going to be, this is going to be kind of like an Anderson Silva, Damian Maia moment for Israel Adesanya, where, the UFC talked about cutting him for the way he acted in that fight, where he dragged it out. People were booing, leaving the stands before the fight was over. People need to remember what the fight that he had after that was. It was the Forrest Griffin fight. And, if he fights Costa, he's going to be fighting somebody that's going to be coming right at him, that's going to play into his style, play into his counter striking. He didn't have that with Yoel. He was forced to try to be the aggressor, try to, get his distance without getting, rocked in the process. Yoel wasn't going to back down from his game plan. Adesanya stayed disciplined to his game plan, and it turned into a wash fight. It turned into sort of a lackluster fight. I wouldn't say that Romero fighting that fight tactically in a fight that he needs to win if he's ever going to be a champion was a bad thing. But I do kind of understand that, there's going to be some outrage when it looks as if you took 75% of the fight off and didn't even fight.
Yeah, he's going to get a lot of credit. The problem to me with the Cubans, and this extends itself to the elite boxers that are out there, and they bring cream of the crop boxing. Yeah, and cream when their Olympians are babied and they've got a creamy top level Olympian, they get babied over there. So this kid, he's always been taking care of it, stuff like that, But like you mentioned, he lost to Whitaker twice. He lost to Adesanya. He took the loss to Costa. Ask your Romero, honestly, in a church setting where he's got to be honest to the priest with the whole thing. Ask him if he thinks he lost any of those fights. That's part of the problem. I don't think he does. I think he thinks
and that's where I think a lot of Romero apologists are going to come in, that there's a very strong, I think he did win the second Whitaker fight. I think if he didn't win the Costa fight, because, watching it live, I actually thought it was 2-0 going into the third for Costa, but it was turning in Romero's favor, and I thought Romero won the third. You could, even if you give Costa the decision on a 3-round fight, if that was a 5-round fight, it would almost guaranteed to have been a Romero fight. And then there's going to be a lot of people that think he won last night. Well, you take those 3 fights and you admit that they're razor close decisions, and they flip all toward him, then all of a sudden he's got a win over Whitaker, Adesanya, and Costa. And he's the best middleweight in the world. And nobody's been able to finish him in the UFC. Nobody's been able to decisively beat him. The closest was the first Whitaker fight, but he was killing Whitaker early on in that fight.
The other thing he has is, those leg kicks, you can see his leg took damage. What I mean? And Adesanya is not, not a mild kicker, I don't think.
No.
So he was taking punishing kicks, and he really, really, really doesn't show it. Not in the fight. That's mindset, and that, he was still hopping
he was taking hardcore right hands against the cage with his jaw open from Paulo Costa and laughing. It's like he has no neck to even get rocked.
So that is, he's got an abnormal ability to take punishment, Yeah. And that, I think, also works against him, because, the The other guys are cutting loose and stuff, and yeah, psychologically it must suck. I know from guys. I know a guy who in competition told me, man, I knew I lost that fight because I hit him so clean, and he turned and he looked at me. You know what I mean? He said it didn't go. You know, he hit the guy perfectly. He expected something, it didn't happen, and that's very frustrating. But that's you've already been taught. I think this is the part. It's like I'm not a big fan of Dana, inserting what he wants and his personality, and he always does it. But since he always does it, I think there's not
He's consistent. He's consistent.
It's not a big surprise that that more was expected of Romero, and I just think you do have to know your client. And I think with Cubans in particular at the elite level, especially look up Erislandy Lara, Guillermo Rigondeaux. Those guys, they don't think they lost any of their pro boxing matches.
Well, a lot of people think Lara beat Canelo.
I mean, and because they're good, they're going to be close. I mean, you could argue that Adesanya was down two rounds to nothing in this fight yesterday. If you
lost the fifth, I mean, you can give 1, 2, and 5 for Romero probably.
Yeah, if Romero, the thing to me, Romero, he was satisfied with not being active, and that's a little bit of a problem, and that's what the UFC really goes against. Adesanya, to a certain extent. Yeah, I think they both get a little bit of the blame for the flat fight, but
for sure,
Romero's done it again before. Romero's not going to come back and fight, at a chump level. Maybe it's time to cut Romero, let him go to belt.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I think he's actually going to maybe make a move up. I can see him going to light heavyweight, but I will end this and head off to the women's strawweight belt. But I want to finish with this point. I mentioned the close bouts with Whitaker. I mentioned the close bout with Costa. And I mentioned the close bout with Adesanya. I think everybody right now would probably agree that those are, whether, people like Cannonier and all them are coming up, those are probably the 4 best middleweights in the world at this exact moment, ranking-wise, would be Adesanya, Romero, Costa, and Whitaker in some order. I will say this. No matter how you view those 3 very close fights with Yoel Romero, it's undeniable that Adesanya walked away the least damaged in this fight. Costa was battered. Whitaker's a completely changed man for life from those wars with Romero. Adesanya walked away unscathed. And I think we're going to see him again late summer against Costa. And, at this point, for all the upside for Adesanya's career and where he's been, this man fought like 7 UFC fights in the span of like 16 months to become champion. And he had the fight of the year last year, a war with Kelvin Gastelum. From where he's been to take this fight when he didn't have to and come away with a decision unscathed, I can't say that this isn't anything but a win for him to move forward with. But moving on, what was not a lackluster fight last night? We had a polarity. We had both ends of the spectrum. We had what some are saying is one of the worst UFC title fights I've ever seen, and I think undeniably not only the best women's UFC bout we've ever seen, women's title bout we've ever seen, quite possibly. I think when people go and re-examine everything with this fight, this is going to be there with the Lawler McDonald's, the Henderson Shoguns, the Griffin Bonners, the Gus Jones one, the Gastelum Izzy's. This is going to be a fight that people are going to look back at. And this was such an amazing strawweight title bout in such a great division. I mean, this division has Nina Ansaroff and Tatiana Suarez and Rose Namajunas, Jessica Andrade. This is such a fun division right now in women's MMA. You had the former longtime champion coming back, trying to reassert her position as the queen of this division. You have this new champion that everybody's fearing, powerful striker, and literally from bell to bell, they were on each other, exchanging techniques. There were so many times I had a room with 10 guys circling around where they would exchange a combination, and it's like, like they both like which one? They both got hit. Like they're just cracking each other. A lot's being made of Joanna's Frankenstein forehead from the hematoba she resisted. And I'll say this up front before I pass it on to you. I had Joanna win in 3 rounds. I think Joanna.
I think she firmly. I think in some of the other podcasts and stuff, and you hear, Jeffrey Epstein didn't commit suicide.
Yeah.
I think with that level of conviction, I can say Joanna won that fight.
I really think that Joanna won that fight.
Joanna won that fight. I mean, the bottom line is there was great exchanges of technique, and the Chinese fighter fought with a lot of heart, and she took a lot of damage. There were a couple of times, I think, when she started to bleed from the nose and stuff like that, where she was facing adversity. And again, she's a perfect example of somebody that the UFC's rushed into the title picture and isn't going to be ready for someone with the experience. And I think that Joanne really, it was in her diversity and her ability to take punishment, because the other girl kept winding up for the big punch, and Joanne was able to walk through a lot of them and answer. Hit her back, have a fist in her face the whole time. Extend that to body shots, extend that to a couple other things. The diversity of it won the fight for me pretty clearly. The Space Monster head, that's a concern almost to the point where,
should they have stopped it?
You could consider it, and I'd like to see what her condition is now and stuff like that. She felt it, and it must have felt like a tightening, and you can see, she's not going to stop the fight. So, I just hope she's okay. I just hope she's okay from it.
Real quick, Miguel, because before I lose this thought, because you were talking about the diversity of techniques, and I agree with you. I thought that Joanna was winning the exchanges, was landing more punches. I thought she was more diverse in her attacks, was landing better kicks. I thought she was answering through a lot of the
exchanges. She almost always answered with the last connect.
I agree with that. The only issue is I think this comes down to how we score, because me and my cousin, we've talked a lot about trying to judge the fights by you're in there. This is like where you're at in the fight. And for example, I forget who I was talking to once, but we were watching some people in the gym. This was years ago, spar and stuff. And one guy was just, he was definitely, the more fluid striker, was landing more techniques, was mixing it up better. But the person he was sparring also had really big power. And yeah, he might land 1 for every 5, but that one that he landed every time was shaking up the fight. I think that's a little bit of what we had here. You had a cleaner, more active fighter, but you had one fighter that had just insane power for that weight and was. And props to Joanna. She became, in this quote unquote defeat last night, she became a rock star. I mean, people, any sort of hatred of her arrogance in the past when she was champion, any sort of criticism of her falling off, this was the best performance of her career, without a doubt. Like, this was her shining moment, whether she lost or not. She became a bona fide legend, especially after a 5-year title run, facing a little adversity and come back and have a thriller like this against a woman that a lot of people are thinking is going to be a champion for a long time. I can't do anything but just give her absolute standing ovation for what she gave us last night with that fight.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I was up and I was pacing, and around the 3rd round, I said to myself, Joanne's got this. And
I thought too, it looked like Weili was gassing.
And I think, and there was something about her confidence going back, and then her head started to blow up, and Weili started to pick up the pace a little bit, maybe a little bit of desperation, but she didn't lay down. So
she didn't.
The thing about Weili, I was saying this on my other friend's podcast, but I'm going to repeat it. It's like, if you need like a 747 move, she might not be the person. But if you need like a 727, like a little jet, they have these harnesses, and I'm sure she can pull that thing, because that is one strong woman, man. And she kept that power through the full fight, and that's 5 rounds. Unlike Romero, It was dangerous in the 5th round, but because he's been conserving energy.
And that's a good point because that was what really, to me, if anything, won Whaley the fight. That's what I kept saying the whole. I was before everybody was calling Whaley, and before that fight started, I was like, man, I'm not so sure. I'm really not so sure because Joanna's done really good against Claudia Gadelha, and she did excellent against Jessica Andrade, and those are two powerful strikers. I was like, she has struggled in the past more with the only person that was able to match her speed and technique, which was Rose Namajunas. She hasn't really struggled with these powerful strikers. So I was looking at this fight like, man, I really think that there's a chance that Whaley gets dragged into deep water and Joanna's just a workhorse. She'll just kill you with volume. Well, it looked like that's the way it was going, but like you just said, she put her foot on the accelerator when she knew the fight was getting away from her. And man, you got to give her props. She is like you said, a strong, powerful puncher, powerful woman, and she stayed in there, man. And she was carried to her corner after the end of the 2nd round when Joanna cracked her with that head kick and then basically rammed her with her head when she like shot in for the clinch and they inadvertently headbutted.
I don't know if that was inadvertent. You know,
it might not have been. But,
I give it. That's experience, though. That's the kind of thing where it's like if they give it to you, you know, it's not Maxie Rosenblum. It's an old boxer's adage, but he said, you know, always be where the ref ain't. You know what I mean? It's like you have a little bit more liberties. I think the punch at the end of the 1st round, that was heat of the moment. I don't think she was trying to, but you could see that already got to the opponents and stuff like that. That you know, giving her something to think about at the end of the next round, I had it very clear in my head that Joanne you should use that, you know, and even if it wasn't deliberate, it worked out that way. And you know, like I said, just you know, it did look inadvertent. I'm not saying that you know she did it on purpose, but you know, I don't think Joanne, you know, if you tell her, hey, you know, it's going to be a rough fight, there's going to be inadvertent headbutts and stuff like that in the fight, I think Joanne's going to be like, okay, let's get it done. Let's do it, you know? Whereas others might not like that kind of fight. I think Joanne does.
I think we need to talk about what's going to happen next because first off, number one, I think you already kind of mentioned this, that we need to know what the condition of Joanna is moving forward. I mean, this was a brutal fight for both of them because Whaley was dotted up also. But man, this might be the funnest division in the UFC in the top 6 at this point. I mean, just because you're going to see so many good fights coming up in the next couple of years if these girls stay healthy. I mean, you kind of have like a four woman tournament going on right now because Andrade and Rose are going to run it back, you know, next month with Khabib and Tony. And that's a great fight. The winner of that, you know, you should probably think is probably going to be next in line. But after a fight like this, do they run it back? And also, those aren't the only 4 girls that are ranked high right now. You got Tatiana Suarez, who's undefeated and a great young talent who she's kind of waiting in the wings to get involved in this type of work. So great division right now. And Joanna also, I'm going to go rewatch those fights probably sometime this week, probably in my truck sometime. But I'm going to rewatch the second Rose and Joanna fight, which I've seen a couple times. And I'm going to rewatch this one. And I think you can make an argument that Joanna won both those fights. And, you know, that besides those 2 fights, the Rose knockout's the only 3 fights she's ever lost at women's strawweight. So she's still cream of the crop at this division. And, you know, she beat Jessica Andrade 5 rounds to nothing. Andrade beat Rose. Andrade lost to Whaley. And, you know, so they've all fought each other. The only combination that hasn't fought yet is Whaley and Rose. And I think that could probably happen if Rose beats Andrade. So this is a fun division. But do you think they run this back, or do you think that Joanna?
I think they're both going to need some rest time, especially Joanna. And I don't.
They can make a main event out of this now, though. They can legitimately main event a pay-per-view with this now after this fight.
Yeah, and I think they do it in China. I think it becomes a special event, for the country and stuff like that. And I think that the Chinese athletes are there for that. I think part of the way, I think it's interesting, because when Neil Magny fought, he didn't go into that fight thinking I'm representing America, and I've got the backing of my entire country, but his opponent certainly did, and I think. I think that's a big that they can really make it. I think that's one of the reasons why the UFC's kind of hyper rushed a couple of the Chinese stars is because it can be so lucrative.
That's a good point you just brought up because that was something with Weili Zhang that she's getting this kind of push. Well, I might have seen. I remember how weird it was when she got the title fight with Andrade because after the Rose fight, there was a lot of speculation about who would be next, and a lot of people thought if it wasn't going to be Rose, that they're going to run it with, and then they'll probably go to like Tatiana. If it wasn't going to be Tatiana, they might do Joanna and Jacek. Some people were even saying Michelle Watterson. Then all of a sudden it came out it was going to be Zhang Weili of China in China. But then you find out that like a billion freaking people watched that fight in China. They got a market there where this girl is a superstar. And Dana looked super excited to throw that belt on Weili last night after she won.
Oh yeah.
Maybe it was the excitement of just how great the fight was, or maybe it was, this girl just was in a great fight, and she's a huge marketable star in a huge emerging market in the world.
We'll see if that becomes a problem in some way, shape, or form. I mean, to me, the bottom line is yeah, they may have rushed her or whatever, and they want to be on the market there. But we do have a trade war going on, and there are other outside powers that may have some influence in there, and we don't know. And I say this, as a caution. I'm not a person who would be like us versus them, but I sincerely think that China does think of it as China versus us, So with that in mind, it's like, let's see them bring over some athletes, and there should be Chinese fighter versus Chinese fighter fights very soon, especially with the population and stuff. But I don't know if we'll get that, The cautious thing is the NBA recently had a scandal where, one of the general managers said something, and, China reacted by taking NBA games on TV, and it became a big deal. I remember the vice president's words. I'm not a Mike Pence fan. I don't even know, I couldn't even tell you 3 facts about Mike Pence, really. But Mike Pence, our vice president, came out and said, the NBA is a wholesale bought and purchased subsidiary of China. So much money and business goes in there and into that market, that the NBA couldn't even react the way they normally would because they're afraid to lose that income and that money. And then, they've got individuals like LeBron James makes money from there. So, yeah, LeBron didn't like that, his checks from China got small. And the bottom line is that mentality we've seen on their Olympic teams and things like that. That competitiveness extends itself to, who knows what type of science and steroids and things like that will pop up in the future in this relationship. We'll see.
Yeah, and I also think, I remember talking about that on a different podcast when all that was going on with LeBron James and stuff about that. When you got corporate entities that are no longer dedicated to one nationality, you're going to have these kind of problems because there's going to be different laws, there's going to be different standards applied, and you're going to have these kind of international political conflicts that these corporations don't want to be beholden to on either side. They don't want to have to pick sides. And, where does that line get drawn? But that's a conversation for another time. Let's wrap this podcast up by talking one last point about Sean O'Malley, who this headline from MMA Junkie laughed off ring rust worries ahead of first-round TKO return at UFC 248. That was definitely there was no ring rust. He comes right out, drops him within like 10 seconds. A tough Mexican kid in Quinares with a nice teep kick to the body, looked just smooth as butter as he always does, loose, very solid with his techniques. Drops him in the first round, feints before he throws the head kick that dropped him again, finishes him off with a nice uppercut when he was trying to get up on the ground and hammer fists him out within 2.5 minutes. Very impressive, just quick performance. Shows that he's an elite fighter. Man, the interview I saw with him and Brett Okamoto, that was kind of a blessing in disguise that he was, we talked in depth about how even on USADA's own webpage, when it has to do with this case, acknowledges there was no evidence of deliberate culpability on his part. And they basically, remove all the charges against him to free his name from it. But yet he still had to deal with court and suspensions that cost him a couple of years of his career. But, as Brett Okamoto brought up, it's kind of a blessing in disguise because the UFC almost certainly was going to rush him into something he was not ready for at 22 years old. Well, flash forward, here he is. He comes out, looks impressive as ever. He's so marketable. He's so fun. He's what the UFC wants and is looking for. He's still only 25 though, and I know how you are. He still doesn't have that many fights. He's still, he's got a long way to go. I mean, he's clearly a great talent, but I do think that they're going to start pushing him forward pretty fast. And maybe he's ready this time. I don't know. You're the matchmaker. You're the, some have said you're the world's greatest matchmaker, Miguel. Let me know if you agree with me on this. I think the fight to make is, and because I do think they're going to rush him, it's inevitable. So might as well get him a test. I think the fight to make is him and No Love. I think him and Garbrandt is a good test. Style wise, it's a great fight. You're going to deal with a heavy-handed puncher and Garbrandt against a very fluid, fun kickboxing style in O'Malley. So I like that fight. What do you think?
That might be the right test for him. You're really shutting down the Garbrandt bandwagon. You know what I mean? If he takes another loss, he already may be beyond, repair with a couple of losses in a row he's taken. But he's a guy who really didn't get a lot of love. I think you said it right on the head. It's absurd to say, the fact that they took 3 years away from him in his career is a blessing in disguise because the UFC was going to rush him. It's like, what if the UFC didn't rush him? What if they brought him along real well when he was here at 25 now and he was, he got 6-0 in these last couple of years, 7-0 in upcoming fights, and you bring him along real well, even if he's outclassing people, and you keep him away from the top guys until you deem him ready. Maybe in those 6 or 7 fights that he lost in the last 3 years, he would have come along sooner, and third or fourth of those could have been a Garbrandt. Now, you're still fast-forwarding it for him. You're still kind of rushing him because the experience isn't there. But he does have 3 years to make up for it. So, I mean, you might as well move him. And yeah, I agree with you. He's a kid who checks off a lot of boxes. So, if that's the case, hopefully grabs some paydays and, makes the most of it because, rushing him would be the wrong thing.
But that's almost for sure what they're going to do with this kid because, I mean, he's so marketable. They're going to want him in the rankings. They're going to want him pushed as somebody that's going to be a legit contender. And, you've been more ahead of that than I have on the fact that sometimes that as talented as they look, it takes some quality opposition before you really realize where they're at because the most notable example, we just seen that. I mean, the UFC was clearly aiming to start pushing a young Macy Barber into the elite of the flyweight division. That would have eventually led to Valentina had she kept fighting.
So were you.
So was I. And Roxanne Modafferi went in there and shut that down. And now looking back, it's like, my God, if she would have won that fight after what just happened with Valentina and there was nobody that made sense and nobody more marketable, they might be shoving a 21-year-old kid into a fight with Valentina right now.
Yeah.
A fight she can legitimately get hurt in.
Yeah, Roxanne, even with a win over Roxanne, an impressive win over Roxanne should not be, and I love Roxanne, but she shouldn't be the catapult to a world title shot yet, I mean, she's had a little bit of an up and down career. She's definitely on the B side of her career. She's a girl who I think, they mismarketed as well. It's like if you're not a guy who pushes people even Ronda Rousey pushed people during weigh-ins. You know what I mean? It's like if you don't push people during weigh-ins, the UFC doesn't back you. You know?
Yeah. And O'Malley's just gonna get the attention due to his personality. I mean, there was reports that he's gonna go party with weed and pizza after this fight, and him smoking weed with Snoop Dogg, and his social media presence, and he's got like a baby face kind of. He's not really the suspecting fighter type, but then he goes in there and he's just a straight, technician and straight killer and running through guys. So I definitely think they're going to push him. I just hope that I hope they go pretty slow. I think that Garbrandt, is a big test.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if he'll necessarily be favored to win that fight, but why not? Why not? Because the UFC's going to want to do some big things with him, and he goes in there and he just wrecked the competition last night. So we'll see where we go from here, but. We're going to get back here on Wednesday, Miguel, talk about what's coming up at the end of the week. And, it was a good card last night. It was hit or miss. But nonetheless, I mean, the biggest highlight of the night was for sure the classic strawweight title bout we saw. But it's been good talking to you, man.
Yep, definitely a nice wrap-up. Definitely the UFC's got, in the next month or so, a lot of stuff to pay attention to. So I'm looking forward to Wednesday. Catch up to you soon.
Talk soon.